Good morning once again. I want to introduce a couple of guys to you, and you're going to hear their stories this morning. This is Mike and Brendan. I'll tell you a little more about them in just a little bit, but I want to give a little bit of context for what we want to talk about together with you today. We've been in this series this last fall that we entitled The Way, and really what it is thinking through the way of Jesus and what he taught and how he lived and what his hope for humanity was. When Jesus decides to leave his glory behind and come to this earth and live among us, he came with a purpose, and he came with an invitation for humankind. And it's not the invitation we often think it is. Like, it wasn't an invitation to become a Christian. It wasn't an invitation to tidy us up a little bit and get our behavior back on track or fix a few things up in our lives. To believe a certain set of rules or guidelines that may all be kind of part of the deal, but he came into this world with this invitation to the most unlikely of people, really, to some fishermen and tax collector and some others, and he says, guys, why don't you come follow me and be my apprentice, be my disciple, be my, in the Hebrew, my talmidim, learn from me, be my student. And what made it unusual was not that Jesus made that invitation, because he was like a rabbi, but who he asked. He didn't ask the best of the best. He didn't ask those that had thrived in religion school. He asked the people who had failed from it and had been kind of booted out and non-finishers. But he wanted them. And when he was inviting them to be his followers, he was inviting them to come live with him. Like all the time, move in with him, go to the market with him, eat with him, the whole deal, like with him all the time. Because the thinking in Jesus' mind was, if you'll hang with me, if you'll do all of life with me, I think over time, the way I think, the worldview I have, is going to kind of marinate in your soul and your mind, and you're going to find yourself over time thinking the things I think, the way I think. And if you hang in there long enough with me and we continue to do life together in that way, eventually you're going to do the things I did, not because you're trying to mimic me, not kind of copy me, but your life is so changed and transformed that you'll do the things I did and maybe even be mistaken for me in some ways. We started this like 4 weeks ago in the, as I said, the first week. This has been 10 years in the making for me, in my soul, in my life. And it's been so interesting, the conversations that this has triggered in so many people, the emails and texts and coffees that I've had a chance to sit with people, because there's a longing for this, a real heartfelt longing for it. But I've also noticed some things along the way in the conversations that one of the questions that comes up in different formats is this really possible for me? Because I'm stuck. I've got this thing going on in my life that I just can't seem to get through. As much as I pray, as much as I trust, as much as I run from God, I just can't get through this. For some, it's some compulsive kind of thing. For others, it's an addiction. And for others, it's somebody just approached me not long ago and said, I'm always angry. And I'm just always angry. What's wrong with me? And they don't want to be that way. And so they're just kind of stuck in that place. And then this triggered in my mind just 2 weeks ago. I was at the Cardinals game and I got a text message from a friend and a neighbor. And he says, can you call me when you get a chance? And so I called him later that night and he said, I didn't want you to find this out someplace else, but I lost my wife on Friday night. And Melanie's a friend of mine. And she OD'd on painkillers that she had been buying for the last year and a half. And she didn't intend to take her life, but it just like she was stuck and just didn't seem to get through that. Along the way, over the last month, I've met these guys, and each one of them tell a story of being stuck, but finding a way through God's good grace to find them through that and to bring wholeness and healing to their lives. And so my hope in asking them to tell their story would be that there might be some here that would find themselves stuck, and they would find hope today to go, well, I'm not exempt from that. I can become this apprentice of Jesus, and he can form my thinking, and I can, in time, be mistaken for who he is. So we're just going to ask some questions and have you guys tell your story. This is Mike. Mike's a friend of mine, he and Michelle. attend our church family.
We do.
They belong to us.
We do.
And he's a businessman here in the city, and we'll talk a little bit about your story in just a second. This is Brendan. Brendan Mcdonough. And Brendan, you might recognize his name. 6 years ago, there was a tragedy that happened in our state that, gripped all of us. And June the 30th of 2013 changed your life. Brendan was part of the Granite Mountain Hotshots. And it was on that day that he and his brothers went out to fight the Yarnell Hill fire. And we know what happened. By the end of the day, you had lost 19 of your brothers. And the profound effect that that has on your life and your soul. So we're going to tell these stories a little bit. Mike, I want to start with you. You're sitting here in a church, but this wasn't always your story. There was kind of a pre-church, pre-Jesus life as well.
Yes,
what was life like for you?
So growing up for me, I was force-fed Christianity from a very early age. It seemed like everyone was living one way inside here, and yet another way out there. And I started moving away from it. In fact, I started hating it. I can remember as a young child, I experienced a lot of trauma, both physically and mentally, and I would often think, how could there be a God, you know? I felt, you know, this continued through my adolescent years. After I became an adult, I went the complete opposite way. I was living a very worldly and destructive lifestyle. I immersed myself in drugs, alcohol, and women, and I made extremely poor life choices. My life was pure chaos. Ironically, simultaneously, I was running a successful business. It seemed the more drugs I did, the more alcohol I drank, and the more chaos I caused, the more money I made. And this gave me a superficial belief that I was, in fact, my own God. I would get arrested quite a few times. I actually got arrested quite a few times. And I would hire high-priced lawyers to get me out of it. Jim Free's not in here, is he?
They're going to cuff you when you leave this morning, buddy.
Statute of limitations might not be up on some of this. I actually kept a lawyer on retainer because it wasn't if, it was when. That's how much chaos I was causing. I really felt untouchable, and I never had to pay for my actions, or so I thought at the time. And that was my life for about 24 years.
Okay, so if that's your life, somehow or other God gets your attention, that he's got you on his radar screen, that he knows about you and he's interested in you. Where does this begin?
All right, so here's the crazy part. Excuse me. My wife and I, we had a 5-year-old son that was getting ready to attend kindergarten, and we had decided at an early age he was only going to attend private schools. So she was doing the research over that summer, and everything she brought to me, I wanted good academics, and she wanted something else, or both. Everything she brought to me had this Christianity thing attached to it, and I wasn't okay with that. So it got down to the wire. We had to pick a school, and we settled with Joy Christian up the street, and I wasn't happy with it. But I was gonna, we were gonna try it out, and I was gonna be watching. He wasn't gonna be force-fed the stuff I was force-fed as a kid. This is where God started working on me through my 5-year-old. So I can remember one time, he came home from school, and he said, "Dad," he looked up at me and said, "Dad, can I pray for my friend's dad? He has cancer." And I remember looking down at him, and the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. And we actually prayed. I can think of another time we're out to dinner, some fancy restaurant, and he grabbed my wife's and my hand, and he said, "Dad, can we pray for this food?" And I remember telling him, "I'm paying for this food, not God. I'm paying for it." Needless to say, he won, and we prayed. He was also learning a weekly Bible verse, and he would come home and recite them to me. And I didn't mention this at the time, but the verse always seemed to pertain to me in some way. I truly think God, right? I think God truly planted the seed for me. My son truly planted the seed for me to find God.
So that's the seed, but I know there's kind of a end of my rope kind of experience along the way that is probably the turning point for you and your connection to Jesus. And so tell us a little bit about that.
All right, so fast forward about 6 months, I'm still living in my own personal chaos. I had about a $600 or $700 a day drug habit that I was hiding from everyone, or so I thought I did. I was trying to buy material possessions to fill that void, and I was buying sports cars and motorhomes and off-road, sand toys and houses and trips, and none of it was filling this void I had. I was becoming more miserable. I was watching people around me overdose, doing a lot less than I was, and I would wake up angry that I was still alive. So on November 7th, 2015, I just picked up about $5,000 in prescription painkillers, and I was going to my gun safe, and I was getting ready to I was putting them in there, and I just started crying, and I was looking at the gun, and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I grabbed the gun, and I went into the backyard, and I remember looking down at the gun and looking up and saying, God, if you're real, then you know what I'm getting ready to do. Sorry. I prayed to a God that day that I didn't believe existed, or if he did, he didn't care about me. Needless to say, God changed my thoughts that day, and I knew what I needed to do. The next day I went to a recovery meeting, and I had been to these recovery meetings before and quite a few really nice rehabs, and they never seemed to work, but this time was different. And the one thing about being in recovery is they ask you to find a higher power, and I can honestly say my higher power at first wasn't Christ, but he was working on me. So fast forward another year, we moved directly behind the Peoria CCV campus, and we'd sit on the porch and I could hear the music playing and stuff, and my son would nag at me to go to church, and I finally surrendered one day and said, all right, we're just going to go and I'm going to get it over with. You know, my wife and yeah.
Evidently others know about this too.
Yeah. I'm not a good driver at all. God had a plan for me. But I remember my wife and my son would attend there with my in-laws. So I went, and I never stopped. And 6 months later, I was baptized in my pool by the pastor of CCV. Yeah. With 6 of my friends that were living the same exact lifestyle. And here's the best part. I had the honor and the privilege to baptize my wife and son that day. So I'm very thankful for that. Yeah. That was the day I turned my will in my life over to God and to trust him in all things. Yeah. So to circle back to the day my son asked me to pray for his dad, that dad was Daniel Perkins, actually. And I would invite him to my CCV Bible study, and he was going to invite me to Copper Hills, and I decided to go just to get it over with, because I thought I was where I needed to be, but I wasn't. I can remember hearing you speak, and you were so powerful and sincere, and it reminded me of the sincerity my son had, and I knew I was home. Yeah.
Yep. So, just as Jesus said to, Matthew and Peter and James, he says, come follow me and I'll make you my disciple. You said yes to that invitation, and Jesus has formed and shaped you, and in some ways continues to do that, no doubt. How is life different? How have you seen that going on in your world?
Well, today I'm a much better father. I'm a much better husband and friend. My days don't consist of emptiness and chaos. The giant void that I had in here is full. Since invited Jesus into my life, I've lost the desire to use drugs and alcohol. God lifted that curse. And on November 8th, I will be clean from drugs and alcohol for 4 years.
That's great. Yeah.
So when I surrendered my life that day to God and stopped forcing my will, my life got a lot easier. So I'm here today because of God, and I'm here today for God. And if anybody that knows me knows I can talk one-on-one to anybody, but I'm deathly afraid to be on the stage. I spent too much time in turmoil and shame, and shame dies in the light.
Yeah.
The light is God.
Yeah, that's right. And then along the way, you meet this guy.
I do.
And how does that all come about?
So my business partner, Jason, had about 6 months ago, he called me up and says, hey, what do you think about going into business into a Christian recovery center with Brendan? And I had met Brendan once before, and he was all right. And but I remember telling Jason, 4 years ago, I should have been in a place like this, and he told me to pray on it, and I did, and it was clear, God said, you guys need to be involved in this, and here we are today.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Brendan, those of us that were here in Arizona on that June day in 2013 know some of the incident and what happened that day, but I know you have a life before that as well.
Yeah.
You were formed and raised in a certain setting and so on. Tell us a little, before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your background, how you were raised, and your life growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California and was raised by a single mom. My dad decided to take a vacation to prison for a good 15 years when I turned 2. And my mom struggled trying to find her footing. And so I watched her work 2, 3 jobs. Sometimes she'd go through depression and, we'd lose houses. And we moved quite often all over Los Angeles, San Diego area, kind of moving back and forth between my grandparents and my mom. So couldn't find that stability. And about 12 years old, I was in middle school, and I remember trying marijuana for the first time. I remember this void that essentially I felt like was filled. And I had found kind of a sense of belonging to others that I'd never found before. And during this time, I'd stay with my grandparents, we'd go to church, learning about God, and kind of just interested but not really making a decision. I'm like an indecisive 6-year-old looking at 2 things on a menu, and I just couldn't make my choice if I wanted to walk with God or if I wanted to walk this other lifestyle with drugs and alcohol. And so I'd moved to Prescott, Arizona my freshman year, and my mom wouldn't take me to church. She was, I don't know if it was fear or what it was, but she didn't want to go, so that connection dropped off. And so the decision for me was kind of made that I was going to live this lifestyle of drugs, alcohol, partying, and kind of chaos. Started getting in trouble at a young age, fights, selling drugs, disobedient in class, just not really catching that gear I was looking for success, more so, going down towards failure. And my mom tried her hardest, but I was a pretty rambunctious teenager, and it just kept going down. The more that I thought of myself and people thought of me, the more I used and the more I just pushed the edge and pushed the limits that were set. And so I graduated high school somehow at 17. My geometry teacher used to live across the street from my best friend, and I told him, that was the one class I had to pass my senior year. I was like, Mr. Trulock, I know where you live. Like, I'm capable of bad things, dude. Like, you don't want to see me in your classroom again. Like, I got enough toilet paper to wreck your house, dude. You'll spend all summer. And so, but he took time to study with me. And there's men and women in my life that, periodically would come in, but I would just kind of push them out. I didn't know what a relationship would look like. Mine and my mother's was toxic. My grandparents were, 8 hours away. And so I just continued to go downhill, but I had this dream of being a firefighter. I was instilled in me at kind of a young age, so I just kind of had those indecisive choices of what to do with my life, either be a drug dealer and end up in prison or, go be a service.
So the dream to be a firefighter, was it to be a wildland firefighter? Is that what the adventure of that, and that's what drew you to it?
Not at first. I wanted to fight structure fires, and I was enrolled in my academy, and there was this older dude. He had to have been about 50, and just had this gnarly... I'm just all right, huh,
okay?
Mike? I'm just all right, huh? I was 19 at the time, so he was really old. But we're doing this physical agility test, and you gotta run up 3 stories with the hose pack, and you gotta slam this pike pole and do all this physical stuff. And no, I was 17 actually. My mom had to sign a waiver, and I remember I got placed against Tony. You could hear this dude coughing in class all day long. I want to smoke this guy. Like, I feel bad for him, the hurting I'm about to put on him. And so we're lined up, and he looks over, and he says, take it easy on me. And I said, all right, yeah. And so we take off, and I'm on the wall side. And so we hit the first corner, and he checks me into the wall. My hose pack goes flying out the window. So I got to run downstairs, grab this thing. As I'm coming up, he's already on his way down, smacks it out of my hands again. And it was just pure chaos and a butt kicking the entire time. And so I get down and I get finished, and he goes, "Man, thanks for taking it easy on me." And he goes, what do you want to do in life?" I said, "I want to fight fire." He goes, "Well, why are you here? These guys just sit on a truck all day running medical calls. You'll never see a fire in your life." He goes, "If you want to fight a real fire, you become a hot shot." He's like an army recruiter. He had me sold. He starts talking about the money, the cars, traveling the country, getting to see God's beautiful earth. And I was sold. And so that's when I switched my path and wanted to go down that route of being a wildland firefighter.
So you sign up for the academy, and you put drugs and all that stuff behind you. You're just suddenly done with that, and off you go to the academy.
I wish. Drugs and alcohol was like that angry monkey on my back that I couldn't get rid of. And no matter how hard I fought, it just seemed to be there. And I thought when I would graduate high school, it was kind of like something you just grew out of. Like everyone did a lot of drugs and alcohol in high school, and you just become a professional all of a sudden. And I was just a professional at like doing really bad stuff. And so I continued to struggle as I went through school, and enrolled in my EMT class the next semester, and I flunked out within like 2 weeks, and I just took that as a sign from God. My relationship with God was like the one with my father, really distant, not active, and just kind of not in a place of surrendering. And so I went back to drugs and chasing a lifestyle that was, leading down a pretty dark path.
So then take us to June the 30th, 2013. You get a call that morning to meet your fellow brothers and head up to Yarnell. There's a fire that's active. And what is that like as you gather together and you head out and as the day unfolds?
Yeah, I'm going to take one step back and just the polar opposites. When I got hired, I was 2 days clean in the fire service, and I was given a second shot at life to do something different. My daughter was about 2 months old, and I'd made this promise to be a father to her, and so I spent 2.5 years, being molded on by great men, that a lot of them trying to lead me to Christ, but I was still pretty hesitant. And so in my third season, I had started going to church ever so often, and we were probably about 2.5 months into our fire season for June 30th. We fought in a few fires in New Mexico and Arizona, and we wake up and get the call to be at the station at 5 a.m. that night. So we get going there, and in the fire service, things are always ever changing, and the job we had thought we were going to do that day wasn't the job that, was planned. And so we started heading to Yarnell, getting ready to go fight this fire. And like any other fire, we get the information, we get prepped. At this point in time in my career, I've been on, 200-300 fires, so it's pretty comfortable. Getting a nap in, just trying to get prepared because we could work 36, 48, 72 straight. And so we get to the town, and I'm looking, and I'm trying to find the smoke on this thing, and I'm like, man, this thing is, gotta watch my language. I'm working on it. It's assed out, we're not really seeing much smoke, and hey, he said it, not me. But they're telling us we got some homes that are threatened, and if some good weather comes in, we can get some pretty good fire potential, and so we got to get around this thing in a hurry. So we get hiking, and we get moving in, and we get situated, and we're at the rear of the fire where it's the coldest, and it's pushing north, and we're trying to establish this safety point to try and get an anchor in to get around this thing. And as the day starts to unfold, it starts getting hotter and hotter, and the fire starts picking up, but it's still moving north away from us, and so the potential for danger is not that high. And as the afternoon comes in, we all live in Arizona, we know about monsoon storms. Some of them come in with a lot of rain, a lot of lightning, and some of them come in really dry and with heavy winds. And we heard over the radio that there was, a storm cell coming in. We could see a building off to the north that was going to bring some pretty impressive winds. And So our captains and superintendents, this is, higher level thinking behind, beyond my capabilities. I consider myself like a knuckle dragger, just a laborer. like we just call ourselves God's landscapers, because we went out and moved mountains. And so they're making decisions on what we're going to do for the day. So they come up with that game plan, and it's to kind of hunker in and see what this fire does. And I'm the lookout at the time, and this weather event comes in, and it starts shifting the fire. And what we don't see and what we don't realize is there's a second weather event coming in behind it. And as the day transpired, within an hour, we're starting to lose homes way on the north end, and so we're starting to evacuate the city, and it's starting to become pretty chaotic. And I'm watching this fire come through, and I'm listening to the radio where my brothers are at, and I kind of have a picture of them coming down the mountain. And the weather, they gave us about an hour time frame for this wind event to come in, so my brothers had an hour to do a 20-minute hike, so they had good time and preparation in that. But what had happened is that second event came in, pushed through the town, and we started to lose homes. I believe we lost over like 100 and some homes that day. And what was supposed to happen in an hour, 15 minutes came through, and it swept them over. And so they deployed their fire shelters. And at this point in time, it's chaotic. I'm looking up in the sky, and I see a plane and a helicopter almost connect. We got people standing in the middle of the streets with oxygen tanks on, just older people that we've evacuated. There's nowhere to place them. We just evacuated a town of a few thousand within 20 minutes. And we're trying to find my brothers, and we can't seem to find a way into the site that they're at. And so they get a helicopter up with a paramedic, and they finally land, and he sees them, and he can hear over the radio, "I got eyes on him, I'm moving in." And during this time, we're getting all this medical equipment ready, and you hear him over the radio say, "I've got 19 confirmed." And I'm thinking in my head, we talked about this. I told you who was there, what tool they had, any pertinent allergies, who's there. We just had this conversation 5 minutes ago. Everyone on this fire knows there's 19 men there, but it clicked that 19 of my brothers had just died. And shock just took in,
So you get called off the ridge, you're the lookout for your own safety, you get called back in, another crew picks you up, and you kind of settle in, you realize, oh my goodness, I know what this means.
Yeah.
What's going on in your heart and your soul at that point?
At that point in time, I'm sitting in the vehicles, and I start hearing cell phones ring. And I remember opening up the center console of one of our trucks, and I looked down, it's one of my brother's wives. Knowing that phone will never be picked up again. And all I can think of was like, God, why didn't you take me? Like this broken addict that's been sober for a little bit, but like, why didn't you just take me? Like, it'd have been so much easier if you could have just took me earlier, because there was an opportunity. There's a clear opportunity when my life was in danger that you could have just, only one daughter wouldn't have had to deal with that. And just the guilt took over, surviving, and the days that would come comprehending how this would affect so many people.
Yeah. Those first days following are chaotic. You're going to funerals and memorials and cameras in your face and all that stuff that goes with it. But then some weeks pass, and now you've got some time. You're alone in one sense, and what do you do with that? How do you cope with that sense of guilt and grieving and mourning, but also that sense of like, that, maybe even shame of like what happened. How did you cope with that once the chaos settled down a bit?
Yeah, so in the fire service, you just don't do that. You go find a bottle of booze and you just chase the bottom of it until either you can't feel or you fall asleep. And so I did that for about 3 years. I spent the first year after my brothers had passed attending funerals, services, fundraisers, trying to put on this smile, trying to be this hometown hero. In all reality, I'd go home, go to the bars, and just find myself in some pretty poor places. And the character that I had spent building and being molded by such great men, I'd lost again. I'd fallen back into very similar ways. And, nightmares, minimal sleep, huge anxiety. I just kind of walked around like a ticking time bomb. My daughter could feel it, my family could feel it, and started having some suicidal thoughts.
As dark as that is, that's not really the end of the rope, though. There's another incident, another point where it gets darker and deeper for you yet.
Yeah. About a year in, and I split custody with my daughter, and I'm driving from Prescott to Cordes Junction to drop her off with her mom. Her mom lived in Anthem at the time, and she takes a nap. I'm driving, just kind of thinking, about how I don't want to let her go. She was like, when I had my daughter, I could stay sober. The minute she left, the bottle was open, and I knew what chaos was coming. And so I get to Cordes Junction, she wakes up, she's like a spring chicken, just can't wait to get out of this funk that she's in with me to her mom's. And so she jumps out, she's in her mom's arms, she tells me she loves me, and they take off. And so I get in my truck and start driving home, and it's about an hour drive. And I can't stop replaying that day over and over again in my life. And I'm like screaming to not see what I'm seeing, There's quite a few things that I experienced, I don't want to get too graphic, but that I'll never forget. And finally I pull over the truck, grab the gun, put it to my head, and I'm just having this violent conversation with God, like, if you're real, give me a reason to live, because I'm going to pull this trigger. And I'm like yelling at myself, like, pull the effing trigger, pull it, and like that, the song comes on the radio, and I see my daughter dancing in my living room. And she's got these balloons tied to her feet, and she's tripping up. And I'd spent so many moments with my daughter begging me to get out of bed, to get off the couch, and there was this one moment when I could get up and chase her around and laugh, and I dropped the gun, and I knew, like, that God was real, that God had something for me, and He just told me, like, that you're gonna have to fight.
At some point, recovery becomes part of that fight. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of an immediate next step for you? That you get into recovery following that? Or what happens in...
I wish. It was like this, please laugh with me. It was this long journey. Like, God had just continuously intervened in my life in so many different ways from a young age all the way up until this point. And kind of like Mike, we have these like little victories. And so my little victory was I was at another memorial, hammered at a bar, and this lady comes up, and she's a counselor from here. And I had just honored 19 of my brothers, and she goes, "Brennan, how you doing?" And I think to myself, God, I don't want to tell her. But I tell her, and I'm like, I just, try to kill myself. And she had I said, all right, I'm going to help you find help. And so I get in to see this counselor, and I think it's like voodoo, this magic she's doing on my brain, but it's working. And I'm starting to get more sleep, and I'm starting to see that like life doesn't have to be the way it was. I don't have to live in anxiety, fear, and chaos. And this pastor was persistent on meeting with me all the time. I tried to scare him away, I'd be like, yo, this weekend I got arrested for a fist fight. He's like, oh, whatever. And I'm like, I'll take it up a notch another week, I guess. And I had this fear that I had to come to Christ like clean, just that stupid thought that like I could be clean enough to come to him. And it just finally hit me that like I'm not perfect, I don't have to be. And I gave my life to the Lord, and I knew that in his embrace and in his protection that I could go through anything. I thought I was a bad kid, I thought I was tough. Physically, I could almost do anything, I could deadlift 4 times as much as I weighed at 145 pounds. I just thought I was anything and everything, but when I found Christ, like he had filled something in me, the loss, the grief of my 19 brothers, the shame and guilt that I felt, that addiction, the alcoholism, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't think about it, like we can't forget, but I've been forgiven. And it's my choice if I choose to suffer from that, because that's not the choice he has for me.
Yeah. You also said yes to being a follower, an apprentice of Jesus, and as much as being a wildland firefighter was your purpose for some time, being a follower these days means a new purpose for you. You're involved in recovery. Tell us a little bit about what you're involved in now, how that new purpose is living itself out and hold fast recovery.
Yeah, so I thought fighting fires was tough, and God said, I need you to open a Christian recovery center up in Prescott. We're a recovery town up there, and there was probably, there's probably about 20 centers that men and women were getting fed Christ, and I knew I had to do something different. And to be quite frank too, I was complaining about what these recovery centers were doing. And me and God have this great relationship, like it's always very clear when he tells me. And he told me either put up or shut up. Like, don't complain about these people being here if you're not going to help. And so that day I was like, all right, like I heard you loud and clear. 6 months later, Hold Fast Recovery opens. We've been open for a year and a half. Almost, I meet this all right guy, Mike, and God has just continued to bless us with the men and women who have the heart to fight alongside those who are suffering, and that's what we do. I'm not a PhD, I'm not a doctorate. We come from the school of the streets, and God's given us these trials and tribulations to build endurance, as it says in James, and like we want to run an ultra marathon with Jesus. Like, give me the strength, give me the courage, the wisdom, and that's what we're here to do with men and women that are suffering. Like, we want to pay it forward, we want to give it back. Everything I've been given is a gift. Even those scars that we have. Like, the greatest gift we have is from Jesus Christ and his scars through his hands and his resurrection. And who am I not to give someone else that opportunity to find that love and forgiveness?
So I said earlier, one of the reasons I wanted you guys to tell your stories was I know some of our stories, and I know who's represented here, and some of us in this room today are kind of stuck. And it might be along the lines of what you guys have talked about. For some guys in the room, I know it's pornography, and I mentioned, sometimes it's just anger. It's just like I just wake up angry and I live my life angry. Mm-hmm. And what would you say is, Mike, why don't you start? What's kind of a next step, or what if someone found themselves to be that person today? What would you say to them?
I would say if you're struggling, we're here for you. God forgives you. Shame and guilt can be crippling, and you're not alone. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You're forgiven. The weight can be lifted.
Yeah. Brennan, what would you say?
To echo what Mike said, shame and guilt is the shovel the devil uses to bury us, and you don't have to feel that. It takes courage to be curious and to ask the questions about the things that you're struggling with. And so I just want to encourage you to be courageous and to ask those questions and to not suffer in silence, and to know that the life that you're living today doesn't have to be the life you live tomorrow, and that a relationship with God is just this amazing piece that even since finding Christ and since finding sobriety, I still have struggles, but he's always there for me. And I know that, we want to walk with you through that as well and encourage you through that process, that there is change that can come, and God does cleanse us and he does love us unconditionally.
The truth is, even the guys that Jesus came to early on and said, "Come, follow me and be my disciple." After 3 years with him, in his presence every day, eating with him and hearing from him and watching him do what he did, you would think, well, that should be enough, right? But then you watch them last weekend of Jesus' life, and they all fail. They all get that messed up. And one guy in particular, Peter, not only does he deny Jesus, he flat out betrays him. And then in a critical moment curses who Jesus is. And a guy like Judas is on the team, and he gets to a place of such despair after what he's done, he takes his life. And I think sometimes as followers, we're not near as far as what we would like people to think we are. That we would actually like to hide our struggles. We'd like to bury them, and hopefully they'll take care of themselves, or in time. It just doesn't work that way. We think we've hidden it from people, but our kids see it, and our spouses see it, our friends even see it, and some of them have tried to intervene in our world, but we just don't want to do that. And so we limp. Mm-hmm. We limp on and limp on. And I would say this is a moment where you get to kind of be honest with yourself and ask for the help. And these guys, they're around. They're going to hang around after this service and through the next one. I think Mike's going to go out in the plaza, and Brennan will be down here. They brought some friends with them. We've got some guys in our church who have gone through or are in recovery right now as well. They'll hang around. Maybe you just want to pray with someone, or maybe you want to pray with someone for a spouse or a child or a parent. Our prayer room is just across the lobby right over here. There are people there that are waiting for you. We'll pray together with you. But don't just let today go and be another day. Cover it up, wash it over, and take a step in Jesus' direction. He's looking back with affection and care. And so I want to pray. But guys, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Thanks, brother.
You can just, you can stay on your feet while I pray. So now, Jesus, for what you have done in Mike and Brendan's lives, I thank you so much for the redeeming work that you can do, for how you can engage yourself relentlessly, how you pursue with love. Your love is not condemning. It doesn't wipe us out, but tries to lift us up and bring new life to us and encouragement to us. And so I pray for Mike and Brendan as they tell their story, and just the residue that happens in the days following, that you would strengthen and encourage them and bless them. And Jesus, if you would take their story, and even in this moment you're applying it to someone's mind and their heart, and it's your message to them personally from these guys. I ask you, Jesus, they would just have the courage to go, I'm done. And they would find the help in talking with one of these guys, or praying, or go to a family member, whatever it would, take the next step. And trust you, Jesus. Trust you that you're good and you're great and you're kind, and that your salvation you offer is real. Your death and resurrection are potent, and they make all the difference, Jesus. So would you, those that are thinking this and pondering this, would you ravish them with your unspeakable and wonderful love? Even in this moment, Jesus, may they find you and your affection for them. Amen.